I'm currently with a company called Adaptivate. We're a global firm, actually based in, excuse me, Melbourne, Australia. We have offices in Singapore, Warsaw, London, LA, Hong Kong, and in Toronto. So I'm currently in Rhode Island, in Providence at the moment, but the plan is that sometime later in the next 6 months to a year, I will actually be moving to Toronto. My Agile journey began back in 2003 when I was introduced to Scrum by someone I was working with at a company who said, hey, listen, you're a business analyst right now, but I want you to work on this product that we're going to be developing. And so you're going to be a product owner. And I was basically like, what does that mean? And so that was my crash course after speaking with him, being introduced to what Scrum looks like. I've been a product owner. I moved into being a Scrum Master at a certain point. And then I joined a company called Sapient. I mean, some of you may be familiar with them because they were a Boston-based company. And that exposed me to a whole world of, what happens inside companies, and kind of the impetus for my career change. And one of the things I'm presenting here was, well, all this, fantastic Agile thought works great, provided you have the right environment. The way I think of it is, you can have the best possible, heirloom seeds that are going to produce fantastic fruits, but you have to plant them in the right ground, and there has to be the appropriate kind of environment around those things to actually make them grow. So at that point, I switched over my career to being an Agile coach, because not only was I working with teams and the kind of the functional roles in the teams, but working with companies to help them create those environments. And so something that's near and dear to me is this transformational work, which is, how do you create environments for teams so they can actually be customer-centric, efficient, have that kind of self-organizing capabilities. And it takes so much more than just looking at frameworks. So cool. So we've got some Scrum Masters, some Agile coaches, product owners, developers. We've got some project sponsors, management, and other. And we've got some people who are operating model experts, and some people who are not familiar with it at all. Great. Okay.
All right, David, take it away.
Okay.
It's yours. And before I forget, thank you very much for joining us tonight and for leading the monthly meeting today.
No problem at all. Let me just, I'm playing screen jump around now. Okay. All right, can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So what is an operating model? Operating model is kind of this abstract representation of how an organization delivers value to a customer. So it's all about structures within it, how they interact. And in this sense, it's the DNA of the company. It's a representation of the DNA of the company. Now, that does not mean that these companies act like machines, right? They're not programmed. And we'll get to that point a little bit later. But essentially, your operating model describes how people are structured, how they interact, what they need to facilitate doing business. And it's pretty multifaceted. So why is it important to have an Agile operating model? Now, I'm sure some of you have seen like this study that the average company lifespan is 10 years. Well, that means that essentially we live in an age of digital extinction, and the fittest will survive. And what does it mean to be fit? Well, the keys to success there are sense change, right? You have to be able to sense what's going on with your customers, what's going on in the marketplace, technology trends. You have to have adaptive design. And by that, I mean, you can't be rigid. Again, companies aren't really like machines. They're more like living organisms. Speed of response. Well, it's great to be able to see the things that are coming down the road, but if you can't, if you can't change direction quickly, you can't take advantage of those things. I liken this to, it's one thing to be driving along and see that there's a cliff ahead of you, but if you can't, change direction in time, it doesn't matter that you've actually seen it. You have to be able to react to it. And then the ability to replicate and scale. This is something that's really important, because if you're successful, your business will grow. And with growth comes a whole host of challenges. Things like, how do you maintain your culture throughout this? How do you create open and transparent processes so that, you can understand information doesn't become siloed, so you can see best practices, things that worked in one area, but you can translate those practices into unrelated things. Like we've seen, you constantly saying things about Agile marketing. Well, Agile started off in the software development community, and now Agile thought's everywhere. So we want to be able to take those lessons and replicate them and scale them. So this kind of brings me to the main point, is Agile needs to be adopted across all functions of an organization. We need to create healthy systems, and those systems have to interact healthily with each other between all the departments, processes, systems. We can't just optimize the systems, or we have to optimize the whole system, I should say, not just teams. And this is one of the main failures I have seen in transformation work. It's like, well, we'll teach everyone Scrum. Well, Scrum doesn't say a whole lot about funding. Scrum doesn't say anything about how you create compensation practices, how you hire people. It doesn't say anything about how marketing comes into play, or distribution networks. But we have all these things that are interacting with each other, and we can't just take them and mash them all together. I don't know if any of you are Simpsons fans, but one of my favorite episodes is where Homer Simpson gets to design a car. He finds his long lost brother, and he talks about all the things that he wants in a vehicle. And he comes up with the Homer, which is a monstrosity that ends up financially ruining the company.
So when I think about operating models, I don't want to think about them as kind of acting as machines. Companies are really more like living creatures. They change and adapt over time. They have to respond to environments. They are made up of systems which are mutable. And so when I think of operating models, I think of them as kind of like DNA. Part of that is the DNA expresses a certain trait. And once the DNA is out there in the world, then the forces of nature kind of interact with it. They force change. There's nature and nurture, right? Here's the intent from from our DNA, from our operating, but it could be expressed slightly differently than what we intend, based on how we want to mold it or how the environment molds it. So what I'd like to do now is kind of go into, based on this idea that companies are like animals. Animals are, there's certain traits that we all assign to living, that are assigned to living things. They have to have these things in order to be considered alive. And so what makes an animal or organization successful? This is really interesting. I was looking at, kind of how do I answer this? And one of the interesting things I ran up against was, how do you define biological success? And basically this person said, you could look at several things like mass. If you took all the combined mass of a species and put it together, like the one that had the biggest mass would be successful. And it's like, no, that's not really true. They looked at a whole lot of things. interestingly enough, they came up with the idea is that basically biological success is measured by the genetic information that's passed from, one generation into the entirely different next generation. So success is really defined by how well an entity can evolve into its next form. Same thing for companies. Again, we live in an age where, Gary, you were talking about Netflix, right? Netflix has, evolved from being competition to Blockbuster. And interesting enough, Blockbuster at one point could have bought Netflix, and they became, in response to the late charges, right? They did away with that. You could get things through the mail. That was really cool and convenient. And then they actually transitioned to digital streaming services. They went from you can see shows, our library of shows, to now they compete with, your cable company via streaming live things. So you can see successful companies are ones that actually adapt readily and rapidly to market forces. So that's my hypothesis, is that, companies are a lot like animals, and animals, to be successful, have to evolve into the next forms. Any questions so far? Any comments? Anyone want to disagree with that? No? Okay. So one of the first things that we have to look at when we create our operating model is order. Structures matter. And by this, I mean, a lot of times we talk about agile teams, but that's just almost like an organ or a tissue, really. You have individuals, right? So individuals manifest the agile mindset. You get them together, they create a successful team. That successful team then builds up into a team of teams working on a product. And so it scales up. So you have to be very cognizant of how you structure things, right? They have to interact with each other. So we have to embed not only agile thought into the individuals, but we have to embed it in other areas besides just the teams. It has to be omnipresent, right? So, that division that, we think about your infrastructure teams, they're interacting with the development teams. Those development teams, right? They have to interact with their stakeholders on the business side. Those stakeholders are interacting with finance. The stakeholders are also interacting with sales. They're interacting with marketing. They're interacting with legal and compliance. In order to really create a dynamic, functional creature, all these systems have to interact with each other. They influence each other. So order has to be maintained in these things. Now, that order can change, right? It can be positive or it can be negative. What we postulate, I think as Agilists, is there should always be this healthy interaction. So we want to stress collaboration across all areas. So when you create your operating model, right, you're going in, you're doing a transformation. You have to think about how do these teams interact in the greater ecosystem of the company? And you have to think about, well, how do we establish these structures, right? I'm always a big advocate for, if teams are working in an agile fashion, then their sponsors should be working in an agile fashion. Quick show of hands or reactions or shouted out. How many of you work with stakeholders who actually maintain their own, not necessarily Jira, but a Kanban board, where they are looking at their work and limiting their work in progress, focusing on, I see some, David, you're shaking your head, right? I think this is really important. I've worked with a lot of folks, and I always kind of work with the executives and say, you should adopt these ways of working because they do help you understand what teams are going through. It helps them provides focus for them. It will provide focus for you, because one of the common things that I always hear is like, oh, I'm too busy to pay attention to this, right? I'm always doing everything. I've got too many meetings going on. I've got all this to do. I'm like, do you ever limit your work in progress? Do you ever say no to things and really look at, should I be working on this priority versus this priority? Pepe, you had a question?
No, I was just showing my hand.
Oh, okay, great. So here, my recommendation, introduce these people who exist outside of the development teams to some of the Agile thought, like talk to them about limiting work in progress. Great book I always recommend in this area is called Essentialism. How to say no to things and approach things from priority. Think about how, as you develop the teams and as they mature, how can you build structures outside of your development teams into other areas of the company? Good example, if you're in the banking industry, you're always going to be dealing with legal and compliance. You're going to be dealing with cybersecurity. How do you incorporate their teams into yours and create healthy interactions there? It gets more and more complex as the bigger the company gets. So success begets growth, growth begets complexity. So you have to think about how you're going to deal with this as you build Agile organizations. Sensory capabilities, right? One of the hallmarks of living creatures is how do they sense things going on in their environment and react to those things? Stimuli exist in the organizational environments in terms of what are your customers doing? What are your competitors doing? What do regulators have to say about things? What's going on in terms of dynamics in the supply chain? Like right now, car companies are having a hard time because they're dealing with shortage of semiconductors, right? This can affect teams' ability to deliver on things, right? So you have to be kind of aware of everything going around. So one thing I say, is, hey, development teams, you're supposed to be doing reviews. That's where you're going to be sensing feedback. How do you do that? Unfortunately, a lot of teams I know don't directly go to customers. A common thing that I've seen is they present it to stakeholders. Well, my question to them is, how do you know your stakeholders are actually getting feedback from good sources outside the company? All too often, I've seen this kind of gap between producing high quality products and seeing how those products are actually reacting in the marketplace. So here, if you go back to the whole premise, like an operating system involves the whole organization. How are you integrating sales and marketing, right? How are you promoting your products out there? Hey, we've got a new feature. Communicating that to the customers so you can elicit feedback. Building, a relationship with your marketing team who's going out there and can provide feedback. A common thing is, oh yeah, we built it, it's great, right? Meets all the satisfactions. Well, there's plenty of products out there in the marketplace that failed, even though they met the technical requirements of something. Amazon Fire Phone, right? It's actually a pretty innovative piece of technology. Got out there, got some good reviews. Within a month of releasing it, they were giving the things away for $1. So not understanding what's going on in the marketplace, even though you're supposed to be building value and you got to your definition of done and the quality was all there, you have to know what's happening in the marketplace. So highly encourage you to build these kind of feedback loops that incorporate, other areas of the company to elicit feedback. How many of you face challenges in this? Nobody? David, what have you seen?
fiefdoms. Nobody wants to collaborate. No one thinks about the customer.
Yep. And how would you solve that problem?
Breaking down the teams, having them collaborate together
Yep.
into small groups.
Would you, what kind of products do you work with, if I could ask?
Right now, a data lake.
Data link? Okay. So do you have customer, kind of customer champions, people you go to that can actually offer you feedback?
We do have a few, yes.
Okay. Do you work with the marketing department to kind of get things there, or sales? Do you pull them in?
No, it's very internal right now. So no marketing, no sales.
Okay. This is a prime example of one of the things I see is we have people out there who are going out and promoting the products, who are, they have daily conversations with our customer. Why are they not part of our review process? Why are they not informing us and gathering data about how we're doing against our competition, about what customers are saying? And this is one of the things that I really advocate. We always talk about, like, reviews are probably one of the arguably single most important things that we do in Agile teams, right? Because value is not determined by us getting a product out the door. It's actually determined by customers finding it useful, finding it high quality, and return it, continuing to buy that product. That is right at the forefront in sales and marketing. So why not get them involved in the process? Have them work with your designers, have them form a customer panel for you that actually can go and say, hey, would you like to see what's coming up in development? Bringing them in and creating an interaction is one of the keys to seeing like good, solid development happen in your product.
So David, for me, we call that discovery. It's the very first thing I do on project teams is sit down with the sponsors, the end users, the sales team, whoever's going to be touching the product or benefit from it. We go through a discovery process or ideation. So within that, we understand those different pieces that satisfy all the different participants to make sure that they're inclusive in that discussion and building out the requirements. So I'm just wanting to chime in that, what you said is spot on, but different names for the same thing, but we would call it discovery. So I'm familiar with that. So thank you for your outline. Yeah.
And the great thing about that is if you can build a good, healthy relationship with your sales and marketing department, you can do it continuously. Discovery never stops. It becomes integral to your process. All right. Reproduction. Well, here, what I'm talking about is how do you replicate success, right? So I've worked with a lot of big companies. And unfortunately, this is one of the things you have to address with scaling, right? Is we get to a point where we're so big that it's hard to know, the right hand is having difficulty understanding what happened to the left hand. Lessons learned, things that you surface in your retros, like, wow, we found a fantastic way to address this problem. Share that. If you have come up with a great idea or you've learned a lesson, that needs to be replicated. So you've seen, if you've done any reading about Spotify, one of the things that they've done is establish these golden paths, right? It's a, generally accepted, opinionated, best way to address something. And it has really helped inside that company for them to become more productive, right? They're learning from each other in a constant state. So when you're coming up with your operating model, right, and you want to integrate Agile thought into it, collaboration exists beyond just working together. It actually should be part of learning, right? Agile is based on learning, right? It's based on a feedback loop. Learn something, modify behavior, execute on that, and just continually iterate. So we're on a constant path to learn. What's the best way to learn? Well, capture that knowledge and disseminate it, syndicate it. And here's another thing that I feel is super important. Active knowledge sharing, you know, reward it, like build that into, you know, I don't know, compensation, like reward people who have great ideas and actively share those things out. Also, how do you incorporate new ideas into the whole? So this, you know, reproduction, unless you're a fungi or a plant, or not even a plant, but unless you're an amoeba and you're splitting yourself into two, right? You're incorporating new genetic information in. So this is one of the important things. If we want to remain healthy and have a, you know, we need to incorporate good ideas into things. Otherwise, we create a monoculture. Those are very bad. So a big part of Agile for me is diversity inclusion. So here's where we go outside of kind of anything a framework would say, and how do you get your HR department to make sure that you're bringing in a diverse variety of people who have a diverse variety of ideas and, you know, perceptions into the world, so that you can create great products. Because the worst thing that happens is you create a monoculture where everyone looks the same, they all speak the same language, and no one has any disagreement about ideas, right? So very classic, you know, things around this. You know, when GM or Ford, I can't remember who made it, but whoever introduced the Nova into South America and did not have a Spanish speaker in the room to say, FYI, you just named a car No-Go, you know, that could have been stopped by having a diverse, you know, population there. Someone who said, hey, I understand that marketplace, and I'm a, you know, I'm a Spanish speaker, and that's not a great name, right? So replicating success also means you have to take good ideas and pull them in. So when you think about that, you know, we talk about like everyone in the Agile team should have a voice. At the team level, this, you know, making sure that that quiet person who never really says anything, but does great work, recognizing that and saying, hey, you have an idea, I bet. Please share it, right? Making space for them. Making sure that, you know, across the organization, they understand the Agile process, right? So that's important too, because so many times I talk to stakeholders and, you know, you're really asking them to buy into something that maybe goes against their learned behaviors, things that made them successful before. Now you're asking them to drop those things which made them successful in the past and adopt new ideas. You're going to have to share success stories with them to earn the trust so that they will drop their defenses to these new ideas and begin to support you rather than question every single decision that you make. Any thoughts here?
I'll chime in, David. So when I see the slide, one of the things that is sprung to the front of my mind was when you talked about Spotify and the golden path. In the context of scaling and altering the fabric of the organization, a common mistake that I've seen is that some organizations try to replicate exactly what worked at Spotify or somewhere else, but only Spotify and Google were born with that DNA.
Exactly.
So, and I see this kind of recurring theme. Any comment, any insights into how to sort of mitigate?
Right. Yeah. So my idea here is that golden paths are great. For Spotify, what that means is they share, hey, here's something that works. If you're trying to rapidly do something, try this. So Spotify has a lot of great ideas about engineering. That comes to the other point, right? Incorporate new ideas into what you're doing. Don't try to be them though, right? Create your own DNA, but take new genetic information in to enrich yourself, to become greater than you were, to evolve to something new. So I'm a big advocate of steal liberally from great ideas, right? The worst that can happen is you can try an experiment, find it doesn't quite work for you, and then then you drop it. Joel, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, thanks. So what comes to mind is that when you're trying to have those discussions, right, about don't copy, actually think. And the most common reaction is, look, I don't have time for that academic stuff. Just tell me what to do, right? So I've sort of got a toolkit of ways to say, no, I'm not going to give you a checklist because that's not the way that this works. But I'm curious, how do you approach that when somebody says, I hear you, but we don't have time for round wheels. We got to make the square wheels work.
It's actually interesting. So one thing that I have learned as an agile coach / transformation leader is there's a time for taking the coaching stance of I want to help you explore options. Other times you have to take a bit of the consultant stance. Well, here's choice A or B. Here's the pros and cons of each. What would you like to do? Narrow down the choice. If they're saying that
I guess I was responding to your comment about you probably shouldn't just grab the Spotify model because it'll only work for 1 or 2 unicorns, that kind of stuff.
Right. You shouldn't try and be Spotify, but you can take ideas from them is, I guess, what I mean there. Right.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah. I think one thing when you hear people say like, what should I do? Really, I tend to turn the question back to them. What is acceptable for you? Where do you want to get to? Right. Focus them back on an outcome. Then you can present them ideas.
Great. Thank you.
So if I can comment, I have a little bit different perspective on replication of success. That's well and good. I certainly don't push back on that. But I think through replication, it becomes too standardized and perhaps may stifle innovation, even though you're building upon something that was done well the first 10 times. So I take a look at these two, the car dealer and the Amazon guy who went into outer space or close to it. And we've had the whole of NASA for years spending billions of dollars to get these humongous rockets into space. When these guys just went up there, quick, fast, in a hurry by not replicating exactly what NASA was doing with a room, maybe 300, 400 engineers in the room for this liftoff that we all watched growing up as kids and adults. And then we watched these two guys do the same thing in a different way, a different model. So replicating success has to be modified by innovation as well, by not simply just following that cookie cutter mold that did work for that particular cookie, but also looking to say, how do we change success to make it different? My motto is success is never final. The solution is. So I just wanted to add that to what you've said.
Yeah, and I would agree, right? Because that first point, incorporate new ideas in the whole. Those guys had 30-something odd years of NASA learning things, right? And then they could apply their own ideas to it. So, it's that evolution. We keep incorporating new genetic ideas into the DNA of our culture. We drop what doesn't work, what we don't find fit. We keep what does. All right. So growth and development. Here is where, we'll have endless debates about things like SAFe and Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what I found interesting here is you really have to ask the company about how they view growth and development, right? How do you preserve what you are when you become larger or become something new? Right? I think of become something new, like, IBM. IBM doesn't make typewriters anymore. They don't even make, hardware that much. they're a consulting firm. So they completely changed, yet they are still IBM. So that's interesting. You know, like growth and development is not necessarily an instantaneous thing too. It can be a slow evolution. One of the reasons I put the little caterpillar chrysalis up here is what's interesting is you have to think about the space you're operating in, because a caterpillar starts out, you know, as, you know, just eat, and then it develops a chrysalis. Inside that chrysalis, it completely breaks down. It's essentially, if you were to cut it open, soup. Like there's not, you know, legs sprouting out of a caterpillar. It's just this gooey mess. So sometimes change is gooey mess, right? You think about it like us humans, right? We essentially don't change a whole lot in form, but we gain complexity as we get bigger, right? So change can take a couple different forms, and you really have to take that into account when you're helping companies transform, when they're going through these transformations. If they are looking to do something immediately, like a big bang, it's like, we're not going to start with one team learning how to become agile. We're going to do everything all at once. Well, you have to ask them what their appetite for change is, because so many times I go into these companies where there's like transformation and teams go, yeah, this all sounds great, but we have to keep the lights on while we're doing this. So how do we do that? It's one of the common things I see in agile transformations is companies don't have a good grasp around change management for people. And so if you're going in as an agile coach leading a transformation, before you even get started with them coming up with a playbook, say, how exactly are you planning to do this, right? What does it mean to take this role? Because a lot of times, you know, if you're asking someone to go from being a business manager to PO, right, do they have that capacity of for change? You know, does the project manager who's now been named a Scrum Master, do they actually have the capacity to let go of those command and control behaviors? Do they want to, right? Again, that kind of dials it back to culture. How quickly can the change occur? I've seen, you know, transformations that take months. Typically, it's a very small company. You know, they can all turn their chairs around, look at each other and go, we're going to change this, right? In big organizations, I'm working in one right now, they have 20,000 developers, just developers. Now, think about these people and all this change going on. In the meantime, you're not talking to the people in finance who are financing all these movement of people. You're not talking to the HR department, how they're going to change their reporting structures based on these new roles, how they're going to, you know, one problem I'm facing right now, the customers, they've never had Scrum Masters. They have no career development path for Scrum Masters. They don't even have job descriptions for Scrum Masters. So how quickly can you change when you're missing that vital role? You have to be very careful. You have to ask these hard questions as a transformation leader, which is what I consider. If you're a Scrum Master, you're a transformation leader. If you're an Agile coach, you're a transformation leader. If you're a product owner, you're a transformation leader. You guys are in charge of your destiny as Agile practitioners. You have to turn around and ask the company, what is your expectation around growth? What does that growth look like? Have you considered all the different factors around that growth? You know, and what is the change, that pace of change that you are willing to make? Because let me tell you, as a transformation leader, everyone tells you they want to change until you actually ask them to make that change. And that is when all these problems are going to rear their ugly heads. I see you nodding, Roseanne. It looks like you've been there and had your teeth kicked in a couple times.
Oh yeah, well that's when the reality hits of what it actually means to change.
Yes.
I didn't mean no. I just want the end result. I don't want to have to go through all those things to get the end result.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, and the related one, you thought I was going to change. No, you don't
Yes.
understand.
Yeah, go make the teams agile. We've all heard that, right? And I think I'm going to deal with this a little bit in the, next. Hey, I call this the metabolism. Funding, right? We all got to eat. We all got to breathe. Well, what makes that all happen in the company? It's money. So one of the things, do a quick time check here. One of the things you absolutely have to address when you are charged with coming in and transforming an organization is, let's talk about funding and finance. Because I will stand up there and tell you, this is where I've gotten my teeth kicked in so many times. Because at the end of the day, you work for an organization that is there to make money. The people who are holding the purse strings, who evaluate if you're making money or not, are the guys in the finance department. They're the one, yeah, I come up with a great blueprint for the team. Oh yeah, well, here's the money to build your team. Well, wait a minute. Now I can't hire, I can't hire a Scrum Master or an Agile coach or this vital person because I haven't been getting enough money. Oh, I can't, what is my budget for building this product? And what I've seen is traditional funding models don't take into account a lot of things that Agile organizations require, right? They are outcome centric. They're not outcome centric. They are feature centric. Tell me how much it costs to deliver this feature. Well, we've never built this before. We have to innovate in doing it. That's going to require a lot of trial and error. Oops. Go back. Yeah, that's going to require some trial and error. Well, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. What I've done is try to shift the narrative with funding, with finance to, let's take a more short-term outcome-based approach to it, right? Think about what you might want to do in the short term. That I can maybe tell you what features I can get out the door to you. Maybe there should be a bucket there too about innovation. Ideas that we're going to try that might not necessarily bear fruit. Is there a portion of this that we need to look at, for dealing with tech debt, building capabilities as part of this? So what I would do is, if you are in the position in a transformation, you're building your operating model, here's how it's going to look. You really do need to engage with finance to discuss how they can adapt to the Agile world, which should be outcome focused, right? Value, we want it to produce value. Well, how do you determine if something has value? You can set up KPIs, but ultimately it's about, did we get the behavior that we designed for, right? Did people buy it? Did they use it? Did they subscribe to it? They continue to subscribe to it. All those things, are outcomes that we should be focusing on, not just did we build the next feature. So, you need to look at things like support and maintenance, right? How many times have you sat down there, they talk about, well, we'll build this team, and people get there and they're like, yeah, I can build this thing that you talked about, but I have to keep it alive, right? Have you included what it costs to keep the product alive and not just build it? Have you looked at tech enablement, right? Are you building capabilities? All these things are very different in the Agile world. And you can't just sit down with someone who says, oh, I need you to tell me the hours. Tell me the hours, and then I'll give you the money, right? Tell me how long it'll take. Tell me the features that you're going to build, and I'll give you the money. Another thing that you find too is, they're trying to deal with, you have to understand this, capital expenditures versus operating expenditures. And so one of the big things that comes out is that time thing. You have to think about how you can accommodate that, accounting rules that they have to follow with this new Agile operating model that you're working in, right? So That's another aspect that you have to look at when you're trying to do these agile transformations. How does funding look here? Anyone had to deal with that? No?
Is it okay to add one more thing to this bucket?
Sure.
When we talk about funding, to me, there's another part of the funding picture. It's almost, I kind of feel like it's almost a comedy network exercise. I'll ask people, okay, so are you willing to budget any percent of time, you name the number, for improvement efforts on a week by week basis?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, sure.
Mhm.
Okay, so like 5%, 10%. Oh, we couldn't do that. Oh, okay, what amount? And to me, it's another piece of the funding. It sort of ties into the funding thing you were talking about, that if they're not willing to budget that, then it's a sign to work with.
Yeah. You're going to create a feature factory in that instance, right? Where it's like,
yeah.
I don't have time to learn anything new, right? Forget that part of Agile, that whole, continuous improvement idea. Can't do that. Just got to crank out features.
Oh, we want to improve, but delivery, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've seen is like, that pure innovation. This is something that's interesting in that I worked in an innovation lab, and thankfully the company that I worked in when I was at an innovation lab knew that 8 out of every 10 things that we made were never going to see the light of day. And they were okay with that, right? There was no ROI on that. It was a great idea, but it cost too much to keep it alive. Or it was a terrible idea and it's money down the drain, right? Didn't work. You have to be okay with that. So again, when you're sitting down with these companies that are undergoing agile transformation, that's an important question to ask, is how much failure can you tolerate? If we pursue a great idea, it could be the game changer, right? It could be the thing that levels your competition and makes you the dominant player in the marketplace. But what's your risk tolerance, right? In all honesty, I work with a lot of banks, right? I work with a lot of insurance companies. Risk aversion is built into their DNA, and it is very hard to get them to do that. This is a pure innovation play. How much are you willing to fund of that? Everyone wants it. No one wants to do the work, quite frankly.
To that point, my problem is that they come to me with a rolling historical baseline in terms of spend, which has no really reflective purpose in terms of what the new innovative techniques are that are out there, and the cost of doing business a different way. You say, well, this is our baseline. We've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. So this is what the spend has been. So let's see if we can come close to that. Well, change is not going to let you stay close to your previous historical baselines. That's always been a struggle for me, to try to let them understand you need to spend more to get more. Not necessarily always, but usually, typically. How do you deal with that?
That's really, you got to sit down with business leaders, people who are in control of that. And you have to have honest conversations with them. Is like, no one has won because they've had the best, cost structure. Like, there's plenty of cheap products out there, but they're not the market dominant products, right? And you have to basically convince them that innovation costs money, and the only way that you can innovate is by taking risks. What you do is you try and you couch that around like an outcome. If I could deliver this, and again, one of the things that you have to convince these companies to do is take shorter horizon bets, right? I'm going to deliver this, an MVP in this period of time. Here's the outcome of that MVP. I want funding for that time period. You're in a whole lot of trouble if you're in this, like, well, here's your annual budget, stay within this past performance, of that. That's tough. But you really have to kind of sit down with the leadership and have those conversations.
Thank you.
So David, a question. So the slide says outcome centric, and in the context of innovation and funding, how do you translate that we are asking in the evolution of these organizations to think about or become outcome centric, but most of the reporting from teams product is still done in outputs, right? So we're asking them to change a behavior, like, focus on the outcome, but still the reporting of the structure, the teams are still reporting on the amount of APIs or the amounts of codes or the amounts of features. So some insights.
Yeah, this is something that you actually have to sit down with leadership and ask them, why are they focusing on outputs? Or, because again, there are plenty of products that have been produced in the marketplace that were produced in time, on schedule, and didn't go anywhere. So if you're going to say that you stayed within your accounting, your budget, you stayed within your timeline, and no one bought it, was that money well spent? Was that success? Output is not outcome. Being first to market's not even like, I think about, gosh, this is dating me, but I see some other people my age here. Betamax versus VCR. Betamax was the better product. It was out first. They didn't think about distribution networks and actually getting content onto their tapes. So first to market, better technology, poor play, bad outcome, right? MP3 players. Hey, millions of them in the marketplace till the iPod come on. iPod was not first to market. It wasn't even cheaper, It's all about outcomes. That's really the end thing that companies have to realize, and you have to constantly remind them as Agile practitioners. It is not about the output. It is about getting the customer satisfied, and that's an outcome. If we can satisfy the customer and then improve our output, that's the holy grail, right? That's really what we want. We actually accelerate our time to delivering value. But first, let's get to the outcomes we want. And you really have to have that conversation with them and convince them of it, right? So does that answer your question? I think you're on.
I wasn't, I wasn't expecting necessarily like a silver bullet. I was kind of like hoping that, but you did share some insights into what kind of techniques or what kind of story or anecdotes we can relate to accelerate this shift in paradigm.
So the way I do this is I've asked, for them to essentially look at what happens when they accelerate things without looking at outcomes and measure the ROI on those. Like, to have them tell you, data-driven, have them provide a data to support their argument that faster output is better, right? Ask them to look at, when we push teams faster, did we have to go back and refactor because quality suffered by pushing things faster? Did people make more mistake? Did you actually get productivity gains by asking them to work longer hours, or did you see that there was a diminishing returns on that? Were there additional quality problems that arose from when people worked and they were tired? You have to ask questions that they have to support. I ask very pointed questions when people come and say, we want to, more output. Why? Does it actually produce anything? Can you provide evidence that it actually does? I can suggest that, it doesn't, that going faster doesn't actually get you what you want. There's lots of reasons. Let's look at it. And that's one of the things I've done is when they push teams to work harder, I then said, okay, well, during this time period, let's look at the number of quality incidents. Let's look at the number of support and maintenance calls that came in while you were pushing things out in there quicker. Let's look at KPIs or OKRs, you know, that were tied to these products. Hopefully they were tied to the products, right? And it wasn't just like, just put this out there, right? Without knowing what success looked like. Let's look at that. Let's collect data and actually have data-driven decision-making. Let's have data support, you know, whether pushing for speed is actually something that is good or bad. All right. I want to be cognizant of time. It is 8 o'clock.
Yes,
right.
it's 8 o'clock. Yep.
All right. So lastly, creatures have to exist in a state of homeostasis, right? Here, a couple things to think about. Autonomy versus alignment, right? This is one thing that I say, you know, how much autonomy do teams have and how much alignment? Too much alignment and you're dictating what they do, right? And you're not injecting new ideas from them. You're not getting, you know, you're not introducing better ways of doing things, right? Everyone's kind of marching in lockstep. We're all little drones doing what we're supposed to do. Too much autonomy, and you've got people not focusing on delivering, you know, the goal of something. They're not focused on the mission. You're duplicating efforts. You know, you're building things that are just, you know, pet projects. I've seen this happen in companies. Going back to Spotify, I had a friend who worked there, and he said, you know, back in the heyday, we were building great things, but, you know, we'd actually be competing internally. So one team's building this thing and another team's building this thing. And that's all well and good because a better idea will win in the day, but sometimes it got ridiculous. So this is one of the things, you know, balancing autonomy with alignment, right? And by this, I mean, you know, this is one of those things where putting the right person in a PO role, right? Someone who's not going to try and control what the team does, they give them a solid mission and let them execute on it, right? You got to find the right person there. So pay attention to who you put in roles. One of the common things I've seen is where, oh, this is the senior business partner or the senior business lead in this area. They're going to be the PO. They may have a lot of experience. They may be a terrible PO. I've seen some great, really junior people. So something you want to talk about with, say, HR is, you know, or the business leaders who are forming the teams, you know, hey, who are you putting into these roles, right? They have to have this balance between autonomy and alignment. Impact versus cost. This is one thing when I was working in an innovation lab, right? Great thing, great idea. It's going to have a tremendous impact. Then you look at how much it costs to support this thing. And you look at, you know, you got to make some decisions sometimes. So this, yes, this had a positive, you know, return. It actually had a good outcome. But this other thing that had the same amount of return was cheaper to keep support and maintenance on, right? And we got to deal with our budget. So somebody's got to lose. You know, sometimes we have to put ideas to bed when it's just, you know, the economics don't work. Legal incompliance. At a bank, sometimes you just got to suck it up and do what is right. You know, this is one of the things where if you're working with teams that have cybersecurity requirements, yeah, you know, this is again where there's one of the things like, yeah, I don't want to push them to produce things too quickly because they might neglect something. This past year has seen just a plethora of terrible, terrible cybersecurity incidents for large organizations. You always have to keep this in mind. So sometimes pressing forward and playing with the hottest new technologies, or could even be supporting your old legacy ones, you know, can create problems for you there. Individual compensation versus group compensation. So here is one of those things, right? So we talk about collaboration in teams. We talk about how we want to foster collaboration, and part of that is how you're compensated. We also want people to have a progression. We want to keep good, solid standing teams. So you're going to have to do something to both recognize the group and reward the group, but also reward and recognize people who put in long-standing, they are wells of information for how the company works, how it operates. How do you keep those senior people as well? And so that's one thing that you have to look at. A lot of companies that I've dealt with, they've come up with some crazy ideas where it's like the number of lines of code actually determines your thing. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really take into, I can produce a lot of code. I can maybe also produce really large amounts of bad code, right? That doesn't say anything about how that person may have contributed to learning or spreading their skills. So how do you balance the, rewarding individuals and rewarding the group, right? You do want to do both. And so you have to come up with a way of doing that. Innovation versus feasibility, right? Sometimes we have great ideas, again, coming from the innovation lab, like this is a tremendous, idea I have, but, it's going to consume a lot of time and it's a big bet, right? That is one of the things that we do have to contend with in the technology world when you're dealing with teams. Like sometimes you are making some big bets. You always need to assess whether it's feasible to keep something alive. So kind of brings us to the end of the presentation. Any questions?
I have one. With balancing autonomy versus alignment, do you think it would be beneficial to have a Scrum Master that knows people's strengths and weaknesses to help
Absolutely.
guide them into better positions, maybe, or lead them into better positions?
Yeah, a lot of what Scrum Masters bring to the equation is those soft skills, that kind of that behavioral psychology. And for me, when I'm in the position of hiring, good Scrum Masters, understanding the frameworks and understanding practices is part of it. Understanding how people behave and being cognizant of that all the time, and that involves understanding their strengths and weaknesses, right? I've dealt with lots of programmers who have great ideas, but they are not the most gregarious people, right? They don't share those ideas. Sometimes you got to pull it out of them. So good example of understanding, like, hey, this person is absolutely brilliant, great strength, they have great ideas. Weakness, they have a hard time standing forward and bringing those ideas in. So I recommend understanding the people you work with. It's huge, and set them up for success, right? Give them the areas where they can, they can play with their strengths and let them shine. Understand what their weaknesses are so you can help bolster those. You can help them turn those weaknesses around.
Okay.
So for me, I've heard a lot of great information on, very progressive, constructs and how to organize content and get the right people at the table. All great stuff. This has been tremendous. But one of the things I found that there are some circumstances that don't allow a progressive walk through to innovation and to ultimate success, because it's a fire drill. The fire's got to be put out today. How do you manage that type of approach when you're in that type of environment where people are not willing to go through these progressive steps and start building towards a solution and all this inclusion and the things you talked about that are value add? They're saying this has got to be done now because the building is on fire. We don't have time for the ideation, all the stuff you want to do, Gary. So what do you do in that instance?
So I guess there, you kind of have to start with why do the fires pop up, right? and find out if there is some kind of systemic thing which is causing dysfunction. And then you need to address that.
Right.
You can address that in an agile way, right? It's like propose, like, one company I worked with, we had this legacy technology, it was constantly causing problems. There, uncover like, oh, this thing's constantly causing problems. There's only really 5 customers of this thing. Shouldn't we move them to the next generation platform and retire this thing? You've got to ask why, get to the root cause, and come up with a mitigation plan that will work. Companies that are constantly on fire have a tough time innovating, and I think that's one thing that you have to bring to their attention, right? Is you have to address the fires and put out the fires and come up with some way to eliminate them, because otherwise you can potentially lose to the competition that isn't putting out fires all the time. They're innovating, they're creating good product. Do you when you get that kind of, we don't have time to do this stuff, have you ever, I mean, it's a tough question to ask, but have you gone, well, what happens if this continues? What happens if you don't bring new product to market and address this?
Yeah, typically go back and to try to just do a workaround and go back and fix the major issue later. Let's just get things moving. So we start to deploy older techniques and older solutions.
Yeah, so that's a good point where you go to funding and go, well, how are you funding these things? Have you just, can we fund a team to put out the fire? Do you need someone special to do that? How are you freeing up capacity? Again, you got to go back and ask them some tough questions. And that's, as people who are in agile practitioners, I think we should be brave and be willing to ask these questions, right? We're here to help, right? That's our sole reason for existence, is to improve the situation and make things better. A big part of that is you have to stand up and say, I don't want to offend, but why is this happening, right? And that's so it's one of those things too. That part of that is when they're undergoing the transformation, ask them their change management plan. Ask them, well, how are you going to support these things while we're undergoing a transformation?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
To elaborate on the last guy's question, I've asked the whys at my former company, and I just realized no matter what management says, they don't want to change. No matter what the owner says, he does not want to change the way he has done things, because that's the way he's always done things. At least that's the answer I got. Mm-hmm. And it's like hitting your head against a brick wall. What do you do in that situation? Do you cut ties and try to go somewhere else, or what?
I've handled it a few different ways. Sometimes it is I try and do what I can in those small little areas to help. But I view it as a relationship, right? There's a certain point where you have to say, this is not healthy. I can't help you. It is, I actually had this discussion today with somebody. It's like, I want to help you, but part of helping you is you giving up the old habits, right? This is not going to work. This is a dysfunctional pattern of behavior. You say you want to change, but I don't see you investing in the change, right? I can't make this happen. We have to make it happen. I can't make it happen for you. And if it's leadership, then, remind them that people look at leadership as the models of behavior. They should be the harbingers of culture. They should be the ones endorsing the change. If you are involved in a transformation, it is absolutely vital to have them be your champion, right? Agile transformations that don't have some form of leadership coaching tend to fail, right? I think in the last, I can't remember if it was the Agile, whatever it was, there was whoever does the kind of the annual thing. One of the common failures is cultural, right? That just upper level management is not willing to change. When I get engaged in a transformation, remind them, you're going to be spending a lot of money here. This is not cheap. This is disruptive. Are you really willing to do it? You know, I know you don't want to play for Agile theater, right? Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to me is that you're successful, right? That there is return on your investment here, that you're making in time and effort, money, people's emotions. I want to be assured that I have you as a partner, and you really got to have that conversation. Where you've beaten your head against the wall for a year and nothing's going to happen. Let me just say, there are plenty of opportunities out there for good Agile practitioners. Sometimes the best solution is to walk away.
But you, I'm just curious, are there situations though where you've been in where it doesn't make sense to change? You know, and how do you handle that? I mean, where you're hired either as a product owner or a scrum master or whatever, agile coach, and you're hired to make change, but then in the whole discovery, it's like, wait a minute, what we're doing makes a lot of sense because this is working, you know?
Yeah. So occasionally, you know, sometimes it's not going in is not about like righting a wrong. I see those opportunities as like, if you find something that really works, continue to try and evolve it and spread the knowledge, right? Hey, I want to share you guys, like this team is doing some incredible stuff, or this is a great functioning between, you know, this product group and the sales and marketing. There's this constant flow back and forth. They have a really healthy dialogue with customers, and we're really uncovering what value is. Share those lessons. I hear this a lot with teams that are like, we don't need to do retro anymore, we're perfect. I'm like, really? If you're perfect, your retro should be all about how to syndicate that knowledge. You know, make that your Kaizen for that. Share this stuff. Make sure that everybody else knows what you're doing. So yeah, can you be faced with don't change. But take it as an opportunity to build knowledge of what is working and spread it around the company, because, you know, it's kind of unusual when you're faced with no company needs any improvement in any area, right?
Have you encountered accounting and finance departments who demand hourly reporting per developer, per project, so they can decide what is capitalized and what is expense? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I have dealt with that because in working with the innovation lab, right, they want to know, well, hey, we get tax breaks for R&D. How do I take advantage of that? And it really requires some understanding what information they need and coming up with a way to derive that. So, you know, if you're working with Jira, for example, right, Jira actually tracks how long something has been in, so it can measure like cycle time, right? And it's probably got some developer's name attached to the ticket. Well, if you can extract that data, you can start to provide those numbers. But again, that is one of the problems of traditional funding models that you're going to run into, is that they want hour by hour accounting, and that's a huge overhead for for developers as well. So you got to question, you're like, well, if I could get it, if it's 100% accurate, where they're spending that much time tracking their hours, that's that much less time that they're actually coding to deliver value. Where do you want that scale to balance? Did that help answer your question?
Yeah. Have you ever gotten them to accept, 80% estimates?
I have, because the one thing that I had to stress to them is, like, these people don't punch a clock, right? They're, a lot of my developers were going home, and they are, they're actually working on some of the problems that they've enjoyed, so they go home, they get on the keyboard a little bit, and they work through problems. So they're not factory workers. I can get you, if I can get you to a good 80% accuracy, is that enough? Hopefully they understand, and that's where you have to start introducing these groups that exist outside the normal Agile ecosystem to, well, here's what our process is, right? And that's how I would address it.
By the way, of the entire competition, 3.5.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Pepe, have we reached time?
Technically, no. It's 7:20.
Okay.
You have a few minutes, but for practical purposes, it's up to you if you like to continue with the session.
Yeah, I guess I'd love to hear what you guys have encountered in going through Agile transformation or Agile adoptions within your company, where you've actually hit kind of the hey, this is a problem. It exists outside of the normal realm of what I, as a Scrum Master or product owner, have dealt with. Be interesting. I'd love to hear from the product owners about your interaction for getting your products funded and getting your teams built. Have you run into these issues? No? It's fascinating.
In the words of Rodney Dangerfield, what a crowd! What a crowd! They're quiet today. I don't know why.
So I'm not a product owner. I'm a Scrum Master. And earlier in the call, you were talking about, getting in front of your customer. I work for a really large company. We are miles deep away from our actual customers, right? And so it would be beneficial, but how do you encourage that kind of behavior? How do you encourage different departments collaborating, right? How do you get that buy-in from the top to do that?
So I always pitch it as, a value play, right? I want to make sure that every dollar that we spend in development returns, there's a positive return on that investment. The way I want to do this is by making sure that every product we produce, actually, the customer says that they are going to get it. They're going to buy it. They're going to pay for it. They find it useful. They're going to continue to do business around it. Whatever the KPI or OKR is that's wrapped around that. And that's a big thing, I think, that every Agile practitioner should understand, is how to direct your work towards an outcome, right? So if you're not familiar with OKRs or KPIs, become familiar with them. Absolutely vital, because it speaks to everyone in the company. So I would then go, if you have a good product owner, like, hey, listen, can you get in touch with someone in marketing who is out there, talking to our customers. And can you provide me data? You know, if you're working on a website, you know, hey, I want to know that when I put something out there that people are going to it, and there's actually like a click-through rate that's, you know, within this target range, right? I want to be able to determine if people actually like it. So there, you know, dealing with the marketing department, see if they can provide you that. They probably can. Again, a lot of times what I've found is, you know, marketing, and they're, you know, they're out there, they're asking customers, what would attract you to this? You know, sales is how, and so a lot of times they have that information, but it's existing in this siloed state. So saying like, oh, you know, can I have that data? And can we work in conjunction so that when I put something out there in the market, you know, you're aware of it. So there should be that. I mean, I don't know what kind of products you work with. Do you have that kind of relationship?
It's really difficult. We really don't. We're so far removed from other departments. You know, it's worth a try. We do have like, we do have town halls and things of that nature where I could probably try to work that question in. I think that might be the approach to take here, but I think it really would be beneficial to at least get closer to the customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just baby steps.
Do you have UX designers who specialize in user research?
Yes.
How are they going about getting that research done?
I have no idea. I'm far removed from them.
All right. So that would be my first logical, you know, build a relationship with them. Go, you know, hey, how do you guys, you know, and they should be talking to the product owner and kind of informing them
right
of, right? How do we extend your research into, you know, before we start building that discovery side to post where things are out in the lot, you know, living out in the wild, and we can monitor what they're doing. They should have that capability.
Okay. Thanks, David.
Again,
Yeah,
a lot of times what I see is the information exists, but it exists inside this place that, you know, you may not have established a relationship with.
If I could add one thing, the other piece that I always want to be careful about is it's possible they actually have a strong connection, but in a company that I don't know what size the company is, sounds like it's probably pretty big. The communication might be such that that information never gets to you, but the people who are actually talking to the market, they might have a really tight. I ran into this in a bank recently where there was insistence in engineering that, oh, we need to lecture you on how to do, you know, user experience research. And they basically got taken out to the woodshed and schooled when they said, okay, you think we don't know what we're doing? Here, come and take a look at what's going on. And they sort of, you know, sheepishly walked back to their desks. So just be careful before you accuse is, I guess, what I'm saying.
Or there's so many assumptions that get made and so many times they're wrong.
Yeah, Roseanne, thanks. That's what I was trying to, you know,
absolutely.
Yeah, and it could well be that they just don't have a clue about user research, but it could be there's people who really know their stuff and the communication channels are messing it up in between them and you.
Yep.
Again, that's where you kind of address things in an operating model. And like, it's not accusatory. It's just like, you guys have this info? Oh, thank you. You know, we want to, we're consumers of your info, and thank you so much. You got to build that bridge and make sure that, you know, you understand that there's a system there. Should be interacting. It's not at the moment, simply because the door's been closed, right?
So quick time check, David. We have probably time for one more question or comment. Yes, it is in 8:27. Well, go ahead.
I have one comment. So for those of you who are, you know, Agile coaches who do work on transformations, here's my ask, because I've been dealing a lot at a very large bank recently, and I hire lots of Agile coaches to come in and help with the transformation. Start investigating these topics, right? Right now, I have a lot of Agile coaches work for me, and they approach things very much from like this team level. But we have to think that this is just one part of the body, right? And Agile is a huge change for the way things work. And when you introduce these things, if you don't think about how you can spread the thought, right, you're going to get organ rejection, right? This is one of the things that I think it's not so much a cultural thing, but, you know, I don't understand what you're doing. You're asking me to abandon, you know, old ways of working. You know, I thought Agile was just for the IT team. You know, I don't need to change. And it's not because arrogance. It could be, wait, I affect you? Oh, well, we should probably have a, you know, a dialogue about why you need me to change. So Agile coaches, get out there, talk to people outside your teams, go talk to the finance folks, the legal and compliance folks, the marketing folks, build relationships with executives, and don't be afraid to make those relationships go as far high as you can go up in the company, so you can have talks about these kinds of things that are going to affect your ability to transform companies. And with that, I will say I'm done. FYI, we are hiring. I'm going to do a little bitty pitch on Adaptivate. We are growing globally. We have here in the US, we have offices in LA. We have an office in Toronto. We are constantly looking for good qualified people. We also have a community of independent people that we have good working relationships with. These are coaches and Scrum Masters and product owners who want to maintain their independence, but they also want to get access to some really choice positions inside some very, you know, premier clientele. The nice thing about this is we take care of all kind of the admin stuff. We actually train people who belong to our independent consultant community, and we come to you on a fairly regular basis to see if you'd be interested in working for some of our engagements. If you're interested, get in touch with me on LinkedIn or send me an email here, and we'd love to work with you. We're always looking for good, you know, quality people who are passionate about what they do and want to help, you know, change some of the major game players who are out there.
Excellent. David, again, thank you very much for your presentation. Always very engaging. And, you know, we hope to see you again next year.